עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, עוד יבוא שלום עלינו ועל כולם. עלינו ועל כל העולם. Salam, salam. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That was Salam, sung by the Maccabees, a beautiful song sung in Hebrew and Arabic. It's composed by Moshe ben Ari when he was part of the band Sheva. What does it mean? Peace will come upon us, and may it be soon. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we are going to be doing some very far-reaching learning tonight, as you shall see. Yehudit in South Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Sedona, Paula in the Great Northwest, Tom saying Lila Tov, Paul in Chicago, Renee in Indy, Lucy in Minnesota, Stephen in New Hampshire, Gail in Virginia, Bill in Berkeley. Been in isolation for 7 days since I arrived, but today I got my requisite follow-up COVID test. Hopefully and presumably I'll be back in 48 hours with a negative test, and I can actually leave my room. Amen. God willing, it should be so. Nancy in North Carolina, Judy in Oregon, Danny in Ohio, Rochelle in Modesto, Elsbita in Des Moines. Lucas Abrayo in Brazil. Welcome, Lucas, from South America. Sandy says, good evening, PK in Colorado. And, wait a minute, skip down on me. John in South Carolina, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Marshall in Enid, Oklahoma. Is it Enid or Enid? I bet it's Enid. Ann in Merced, Michael from a messy room, and Yosef in Lowell, Massachusetts. Lynn in North Texas, and Lindsay in Cincinnati. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. We have a spectacular dedication tonight from our good friend Craig Simon, who is dedicating tonight's learning on AT Daily to his mom, Harriet. There's no way I could improve on what Craig said about his mom, Harriet, so I'm just going to read it. My mother, Harriet, was a force of nature. She was born in 1925, and she founded her own real estate firm at 35 years old in Beverly Hills in 1960, the Mad Men era. And she handled shopping centers, hotels, and commercial property sales. She was a major wage earner, earning more than $150,000 a year back in those days, 1960. Yeah, that's big money. She was an ardent feminist, a supporter of the African American community when the local laws would still allow you to discriminate. And her stance was not popular among the wealthy. And she taught us boys how to treat women as equals. She died at age 94 on March 1st, 2020. And that was the last time I saw Craig when we were together at APAC. That was just days before the whole COVID plague broke out in the United States. She had Alzheimer's for about 14 years and was in a major decline. She laughed with her whole body. What a beautiful detail. She laughed with her whole body, and she gave extensively to charity. Craig, may Harriet's memory always be for a blessing. May her soul, her neshama, have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world to come. And we say amen. And Craig, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we thank you for sponsoring tonight's episode of AT Daily. And let us all say amen, that Craig's family should be showered in blessings. All right. Where are we holding this evening? This is Daf Tzadi Dalet, page 94, here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Passover. We are in chapter 9 and continuing our discussion of the second Mishnah, which basically elaborates on the idea that the Torah says one who is on a distant journey is exempt, is excused from bringing the Korban Pesach, bringing the Passover offering, which of course we only do when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. Hasn't in 2,000 years, but God willing it'll be rebuilt, the third temple, and then we can observe these laws. But if one is too far away, so then he's excused. What should he do? He should make a point of being close enough to bring it for Pesach Sheni, the second opportunity to bring the Passover offering on the 14th of the Hebrew month of Iyar, 1 month later. So now the sages are getting into defining, okay, so what is a distant journey? And what we saw yesterday was that there was a city called Modeim, which was about 15 mil, and a mil in the Talmud is very close to equal to a kilometer. So this is a city that was about 15 kilometers from the outskirts of Jerusalem, so figure about 10 miles. And if you were closer than that, okay, so you're close enough. You should make it your business to get to Jerusalem and bring the Korban Pesach, bring the Passover offering. If you're farther away than that, okay, you're on a distant journey, you're excused, you don't have to bring it at Pesach Rishon, the first Pesach, but you should bring it a month later if possible. And now that we're starting to define distances, in today's daf, the sages are going to start to have a discussion about this distance and some greater distances and some really greater distances. They're going to start to define the length or the area of Africa, the area of the world, the area of the firmament, the area of the universe. Now, of course, the sages did not have access to far-reaching telescopes. They didn't have the Hubble space-based telescope, etc. And so, of course, their knowledge of the universe and the cosmos, let's say, the solar system, the galaxies, they didn't have the same information available that we have. So we might be tempted to sort of chuckle from our viewpoint in modernity and say, what they're saying doesn't conform with our understanding of the physical distances of the universe and of the earth. We should not be so quick to chuckle. First of all, they even then realized that they didn't have exact measurements, and that's why they debated. They were looking for sources in Torah. They were looking for sources based on their own observations from what they could see on Earth without telescopes. And they were also talking about something that may not be related to the physical world at all. Perhaps they were judging a little bit more these distances, what they might mean in terms of the ethical realm or the spiritual realm. And so then what gets much more interesting is to compare distances, right? One thing that's going to be interesting is that they talk about the size of paradise and this of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, which is understood to be paradise, and Gehenna, right, which is basically hell, although the way it's in the Jewish scheme, hell is generally not a permanent place. It's a place where the soul goes to be refined of whatever residue our transgressions leave in this world before it can move on into paradise. So it's very interesting. So you'd think that since Gehenna is really just a temporary place where you go spend a little time and then you go to paradise, so you would expect that paradise is much larger than Gehenna. And we're not going to find that. So we're going to think about what it all means. Let's introduce this topic by hearing what Rav Steinsaltz says about the way that the sages understood the distances of the earth and of the cosmos. The Geonim, so the Geonim are later sages, right, in the period, I guess, from about 500 to 1,000. So not the sages of the Talmud, but the next set of generations of sages. The Geonim noted that Talmudic discussions such as these are not part of the corpus of Torah law or theology that Jews must accept. Rather, these statements are based upon a certain conception of the world, with regard to which there were differences of opinion among the sages themselves. The Geonim also asserted that because the sages conceded that the sages of the nations of the world were correct in their description of the world, the model of the world presented in this context is irrelevant. However, it should be noted that according to some later commentators, the elements mentioned in this discussion are related to the spiritual or ethical realms rather than the physical world, as, according to them, the sages did not differentiate between these realms. Right? So isn't that beautiful? For the sages, the spiritual realms are not, like nice concepts we don't know anything about. For them, there's the spiritual realm, there's the physical realm. They are equally real, they are equally irrelevant to our lives, and they're equally the subject of discussion, right? And so they're going to try to, they're going to try to derive certain measurements. Again, I think what's interesting is the underlying concepts and the relative measurements of the various places that we're going to be talking about. And for this reason, the sages, defined the measurements of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, and Gehenna according to the terms of measurement of the physical world, despite the fact that they are part of a different dimension of reality, right? So Gan Eden and Gehenna, they're not located like you go up or you go down or you go in or you go out. Right? You access those through a spiritual portal, and yet they're going to talk about the measurements of them. But as we can imagine, once we enter the spiritual realm, how big is a person in the spiritual realm? Elsewhere in the Talmud, we had the understanding that Adam Rishon, Adam, right, that the first person, Adam and Eve, before they ended up in Gan Eden, they were as large as the cosmos themselves because they were spiritual beings, right? The initial form of them. Then they were, they went into Gan Eden and acquired more of a physical form. And then certainly when they left Gan Eden, they had a very physical form. And by the sweat of your brow you shall eat, etc. All right, let's get into it here. So we're starting near the top of Daf Tzadi Daled, page 94. Here we go. The sages taught. If one was standing outside the city of Modeim and was able to enter Jerusalem on horses or mules, but not by walking, I might have thought that he would be liable to receive charis, spirit excision at the hands of the heavenly court, for failing to come to Jerusalem and offer the Paschal lamb. Therefore, the verse states, and is not on a journey. If a person is not on a journey, Numbers 9:13, this person was on a distant journey and he's therefore exempt. And by the way, this town of Modeim, right, which is sort of like the limit, it just defines the limit, but the limit would be, a circumference, right? Anywhere you are, that's about 15 kilometers away from Jerusalem, you would be excused as being on a distant journey. You wouldn't have to bring the Korban Pesach. And then somebody asked yesterday, is that the same place as the modern Modein? Hard to say. I was reading a little bit more about this. Some say yes, some say no. The distance is a little bit different, but there are a lot of archaeological remains around modern Modein. There's another Talmudic reference to Modein as a place where you can start to assume that the pottery is being kept at a higher spiritual level in terms of ritual purity once you're that close to Jerusalem. Suffice it to say that Modeim, the way the sages understood it, is like you've entered the suburbs of Jerusalem, right? You've entered the suburbs, you're in the region of Jerusalem. That's a good way to think of it. On the other hand, if one was standing closer to Jerusalem than Modeim, but was not able to enter due to the camels and carriages that are carrying his family and delaying him, I might have thought that he would not be liable for failing to offer the Paschal lamb because he is trying to enter. Therefore, the verse states, and was not on a journey, and this person was not on a distant journey. He's close enough. He encountered delays because of his camels, and they're slowing him down. What should he have done? He should got off the camel and walk up to Jerusalem because he has enough time to get to Jerusalem and offer the Paschal offering on time. So what we see here, what the sages conclude is it's a matter of distance, right? It's not a matter of how long it actually takes because of your circumstances. If you're closer than Modi'in in about 15 mil, as this Talmud defines it, so then you're not on a distant journey and you're liable to bring the Paschal offering. If you're further away than that, even though you could get there by walking really fast, you're excused. You don't have to get there. The discussion above pertaining to the distance that an average person can walk in a day, which was on yesterday's page, is based on the assumption that he walks 5 mil, about 5 kilometers, between dawn and sunrise. The Gemara brings support for this assumption. Rava said, so to bring support for this assumption that a person can walk about 5 kilometers, right, about 3 miles, between when the first light comes into the world and the sun actually rises, which is, about approximately an hour. So this is definitely workable. But to test that assumption, now we're going to get into these other distances. Rava said, the size of the world is 6,000 parasangs, and the thickness of the firmament is 1,000 parasangs. As we saw yesterday, a parasang is 4 mil, right? So Rava is saying that the size of the world is about 24,000, right? It's times 4. So 24,000 kilometers. The size of the world is about 24,000 kilometers. And the thickness of the firmament is 1,000 parasangs. So that would be about 4,000 kilometers. What is the firmament? Right, so the firmament is basically a foreign concept to the modern human being. The firmament, however, is how the ancients understood the cosmos, right? It was the dome above the world, right? So they obviously, they had a sense of a geocentric world, not around Earth, but like that the known world was this kind of flat or roughly flat place, and that there was a dome over it that the moon and the sun and the stars moved through. Later, there would be the idea of the spheres, the concentric spheres, right? That there were levels of spheres that contained the various stars and constellations, and that they were all turning. And because that actually became a better mathematical model for predicting the motion of the stars, then this idea of just a dome, right, a half dome, as it were, over the world. That's why we have this idea that the Jewish sages would come to say, actually the non-Jewish sages have brought a better model. And so even the sages of the Talmud were willing to say, okay, so, they have a better observation, they have a better system, we'll go with that. Right? So there was always this sense of being open to science, as it were, open to measured distances. So one of these measurements with regard to the size of the world is a tradition, and one of the measurements is based upon Rava's own reasoning. The Gemara explains. Rava holds like that statement which Rabba bar Chana said, that Rabbi Yochanan said. How far can an average person walk in a day? One can walk 10 parasangs. So that would be 40 mil, about 40 kilometers, about 25 miles. Okay, that makes perfect sense. A person can walk about 25 miles in a day. And this is explained. From dawn until sunrise, one can walk 5 mil. So every time I say mil, think kilometer. A mil is just a little less than a kilometer. A mil is a little less than a kilometer. So from dawn until sunrise, one can walk a distance of 5 mil. From sunset until the emergence of the stars, one can walk another 5 mil. Therefore, it is found that the thickness of the firmament is 1/6 of the distance that the sun travels during the day. Between sunrise and sunset, the sun travels a distance of 6,000 parasangs during the amount of time that an average person can walk 30 mil. During the dawn and twilight periods in the morning and evening, when the sun passes through the firmament An average person can walk 5 mil, which is 1/6 of the distance he can walk between sunrise and sunset. Consequently, during dawn and twilight, the sun must also travel 1/6 of the distance that it travels between sunrise and sunset, i.e. 1,000 parasangs, which is the thickness of the firmament. So they're saying that since a person between dawn and sunrise walks about 1/6 of the total distance that a person can walk in a day, so if the sun is traveling over the whole world, and between dawn and sunrise, that's the time that the sun is traveling through the firmament, right? So the firmament is the way that Jewish sages understood it, this half dome over the world. And what does the sun do, right? At dawn, it starts traveling through the dome. At sunrise, you see the sun. It has come through the dome. Then it travels over the world. And then in the evening twilight, it travels through the dome again, and then somehow is brought to the other side. The Gemara raises an objection from the following Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, the thickness of the firmament is only 1/10 of the distance that the sun travels during the day. Know that this is true because how far can an average person walk in a day between dawn and the emergence of the stars? One can walk 10 parasangs. So one walks about 40 mil in a day. And from dawn until sunrise, one can walk only 4 mil. So before we thought, well, from dawn to sunrise, a person walks 5 mil. That's 1/6 of the total. Now he's saying 4 mil, which is going to be 1/10 of the total. And therefore it is found that the thickness of the firmament is only 1/10 of the distance that the sun travels during the day. This is a refutation of the opinion of Rava, and similarly is a refutation of the opinion of Ula, who holds that an average person can walk 15 mil in half a day, whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds that the average person can walk 16 mil in half a day. And the Gemara concludes, it is indeed a conclusive refutation, right? So isn't it beautiful? They're going to judge heavenly distances based on approximately how far a person can walk in a day and how much of that walk he accomplishes between dawn and sunrise. The Gemara suggests, let us say that this will be a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rabba bar Bar Chana, citing Rabbi Yochanan with regard to how far an average person can walk in a day. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan could have said to you, I'm speaking about the total distance that an average person walks in an entire day. But I never specified the distance that one can walk during different parts of the day. And it was the sages Ula and Rava who made a mistake in interpreting my opinion by saying that one can walk 5 mil and not 4 mil during each intermediate period, right? The morning twilight and the evening twilight. Because when they calculated 5 mil before sunrise and after sunset, they included the distance walked by people who set out earlier in the morning, before dawn, and by those who continued walking after nightfall, right? So is it that a person can walk about 40 kilometers total in a day because that's like a normal distance for a human to travel before he's too tired? Okay, but when does he start? Does he start in the darkness or does he start at dawn? And the Gemara suggests, let us say it is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Hanina, who proved from biblical verses that the distance from Sodom to Zoar is 5 mil. So that was in the incident of when the angels came to rescue Abraham's nephew Lot from Sodom, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. Before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, angels were sent there to do the destruction, but first to rescue Lot and his family. And in that verse, it says that they went from Sodom to Zoar in that period between dawn and sunrise, which they figured out is 5 mil. However, the angels and Lot walked that distance between sun and sunrise, implying that it is only 4 mil. And the Gemara responds, no, that verse states the angels hastened Lot. The reason that they were able to do it in that period of time, which normally a person walks 4 mil, but Lot walked 5 mil, is because the angels were rushing him along, saying, hey, fire and brimstone are about to fall from the sky and destroy this city. Move it, move it. Sure, you're going to walk a little farther to avoid that. Now, Now, come in here a challenge from a Baraisa to the previous opinion with regard to the size of the world. Now, here's where we really get into those relative sizes. The Baraisa says the size of Egypt was 400 parasangs by 400 parasangs. And Egypt is 1/60th the size of Cush. And Cush is 1/60th the size, and Cush is 1/60th of the world, and the world is 1/60th the size of the Garden of Eden, and the Garden of Eden is 1/60th of Eden, and Eden is 1/60th the size of Gehenna. Therefore, it is found that the entire world is like a pot cover, which is a small part of the total size of the pot, compared to Gehenna. In any event, based upon the sizes of Egypt and Cush, it is apparent that the entire world is larger than 6,000 parasangs, and this is indeed a conclusive refutation. Now, let's back up a second and break this down. So first they're saying in the Baraisa that Egypt is about 400 parasangs by 400 parasangs. Now, this is ancient Egypt. It doesn't have the same boundaries that the modern state of Egypt has, the modern nation of Egypt. But 400 parasangs by 400 parasangs, not bad. That's about 1,600 kilometers by 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 miles by 1,000 miles. That is not too far off from the size of Egypt. Then it says that Egypt is 1/60th the size of Cush. So Cush is basically Africa, or maybe the greater part of Africa, a very large part of Africa. Maybe, like all of the width and the large upper part of Africa, or maybe all of Africa, right? So Cush, often associated with Ethiopia, but it's really understood to mean a large part of Africa. So could we say that Egypt is about 1/60th the size of Africa? I mean, it's not crazy. I actually looked up these numbers, and I saw that Egypt is about 1 million square kilometers, and Africa is about 30 million square kilometers. Okay, so Egypt is actually 1/30th of Africa. To say it's 1/60th, not bad. Particularly because when the sages say that something is 1/60th of something else, as we've seen before, when something is 1/60th or less, the volume of something else, it's understood to be nullified by it. In other words, if you drop a drop of milk into a beef stew, you can't mix milk and dairy. You can't mix dairy and meat, of course. But if it's less than 1/60th the volume of the beef stew, the milk is understood to be nullified, and you haven't ruined the beef stew. You could still eat it so long as you can't taste the milk in it. It has to be less than 1/60th and impart no flavor. So 1/60th really means, a very small part of the whole. So they weren't that far off in terms of Egypt and all of Africa. And then they say that Cush, right, Africa more or less, is 1/60th the size of the whole world. Well, Africa is about 30 million square kilometers, and the whole world is about 500 million square kilometers. So 1/6, not bad. Again, this is going to be 30 to 500 is going to be 10, 16, okay? Right, so about 16, about 16 versus 60. Not crazy, right? It's not that these numbers are at a scale that is totally illogical. Okay, so that is when now we're still in the physical world. Then they're saying, okay, the world, as we understand it, with its land and oceans, is going to be 1/60th the size of Gan Eden, right? So the physical world that we inhabit is only 1/60th the size of Gan Eden, right? And Gan Eden is paradise. Then we get to a very interesting thing. Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is only 1/60th the size of Eden. Now that actually makes a lot of sense, right? It's the Garden of Eden. It's just, imagine like you have a beautiful resort, right? And there's the garden. That's not the whole resort. That's just the garden. There's the rest of the resort. I don't feel like we often talk about Eden as opposed to Gan Eden, right? Eden as opposed to the Garden of Eden. I don't know what's in Eden. I haven't learned lessons about Eden. Fascinating to speculate about what Eden might be, that greater part of paradise. And then this question is what really makes me whoa. So Gan Eden, 1/60th of Eden, and then Eden is 1/60th the size of Gehenna. Gehenna is hell. It's a place for refining. The vast majority of human beings who've ever lived in the world are not going to end up there permanently. You have to be really evil and have done terrible, terrible, terrible things to get the permanent sentence, right? The eternity in Gehenna. So the vast, vast majority of people are heading, toward paradise. They're going to stop in Gehenna. Why is Gehenna so much bigger than Eden, which is so much bigger than Gan Eden? That is interesting to me. And it's not explained here. So this is now pure Sal speculation. Pure. I have no source for this whatsoever. But just out of my own head, why would it be so big? I would suggest that Gan Eden, part of what's beautiful about it is that we're close together. All the souls are close together. Now, souls, we have no understanding of how souls occupy space. Maybe two souls can actually occupy the exact same space and be together. Maybe many souls can occupy the same space. And so part of what's beautiful about paradise is that we're all together and intermingling, and you can learn with Moses, or you can meet Adam, you can meet, other historical figures. Everyone's together. Gehenna, everybody's so scattered. And the real hell of it is that you're completely alone, isolated, and you have to deal with what you've done in your life, and every bit of it is available for you to review, right? Maybe the punishment isn't so much a burning fire as a full cognizance of every deed you ever did and seemingly endless time to contemplate it, right? It might seem quite endless to you if you're completely alone and not with a fuzzy, misty memory, but with an absolute clear memory of everything you've ever done and said in isolation. Perhaps that is one aspect of Gehenna. Again, I don't have a source for that other than these relative sizes of these places in the Jewish cosmology. Let's go on. Come and hear another challenge. And of course, if you have questions and comments, and I imagine some people will have questions and comments today, get them in the comments. I'm not too far from the end, and then we'll discuss. Okay, come and hear another challenge. One of the sages of the school of Eliyahu taught that Rabbi Nassan says the entire settlement, in other words, the area of the world that is inhabited, sits under one star. Know that this is correct because when a person focuses his eye on one star, he can travel east as far as he wishes within the settled part of the world, and the star remains opposite him in the same place. He can travel in the four directions of the world, and the star remains in its place above him. By inference, the entire settlement of the world rests under one star, and since so many stars are visible, and each one covers an area of the world comparable in size to the entire settled portion of the world, it must be that the world is much larger than 6,000 parsecs. The Gemara comments that this is indeed a conclusive refutation of Rava's opinion. Now they're starting to contemplate, well, the part of the world that we know, right? And this is before Columbus and Magellan and circumnavigation, but already they're starting to suggest that, well, the part of the world that we know is a very small part of the world. There's a much greater world that we don't know about. And every star covers some part of the world. And there's, they could see a nearly infinite number of stars in the sky, in the night sky. So the world must be much larger, right? They didn't think about space and planets, but they were already saying that the known world is only a very small part of that greater world. Come in here, another challenge from another Baraisa, which teaches that the constellation Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, is in the north, and the constellation Scorpio is in the south. And the entire settlement, the known part of the world where people live, sits under Ursa Major and Scorpio, as the relative positions of these two constellations appear to be the same from any location in the settled areas of the world. So the ratio of the entire settlement to the world as a whole is comparable to only 1 hour in a day, as the sun enters the sky above the settlement for only 1 hour a day, while the rest of the day is outside the settlement. In other words, they're saying that the sun traverses the whole world, right? The sun passes overhead. We know our Earth rotates, but from their understanding, right, the sun passes over the whole world, but it is only directly overhead for about an hour, right? Approximately from 11:30 to 12:30 in the day. It's just, you can think of the sun as overhead only for about an hour. And that's the amount of time it takes for it to traverse the known part of the world, the parts of the world where people live, is what they're suggesting here. Come in here, another challenge. As Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, what response did the divine voice answer to that wicked man, Nebuchadnezzar, when he said, Isaiah 14:14, Nebuchadnezzar who destroyed the first temple, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Right? I will be a god, right? Is what Nebuchadnezzar was saying. That same arrogance of Pharaoh, of Nebuchadnezzar. You could think about the poem by Shelley, Ozymandias, look upon ye mighty and despair. This fallen statue to some king that disappeared and no one even knows his name, right? That arrogance of kings who think they can be like a god. So Nebuchadnezzar said something like that. A divine voice emerged and said to him, wicked man, son of a wicked man, the disciple in corruption of Nimrod the wicked, who caused the entire world to rebel against me, against God, during his reign, by advising the generation of the dispersion to build a tower in order to fight the hosts of heaven. In other words, the Tower of Babel. So now that God is going to offer Nebuchadnezzar a proof of how insignificant he is, which is going to touch on our discussion of distances. So how many are the years of a person altogether? 70 years, and if he is with strength, 80 years. As it is stated, Psalm 90, verse 10, the days of your years are 70 years, and with strength, 80 years. In contrast, from the earth to the first firmament of the seven, this is discussed in Tractate Chagiga on page 12b, from the earth to the first firmament is a walking distance of 500 years. And the thickness of the firmament is a walking distance of 500 years, which is equal to approximately 1.8 million parasangs. And between each firmament is another walking distance of 500 years, and so too between each and every firmament. Therefore, how can you, Nebuchadnezzar, hope to reach the heavens in your lifetime? A person lives 80 years. To get up there would take you hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Hundreds of years, at least at a walking pace. Therefore, how can you, Nebuchadnezzar, hope to reach the heavens in your lifetime such that you say, I will be like the Most High? Rather, the verse continues, Isaiah 14:15, you shall be brought down to the netherworld, to the uttermost parts of the pit. In any event, this is a conclusive refutation of Rava's opinion that the thickness of the firmament is only 1,000 parasangs. Now, to go back for a moment to this idea of Gehenna, that Gehenna is so large, and then we did have the image that we just read that the world is like a pot cover on Gehenna. Now, why is Gehenna called Gehenna? It's actually based on the name of a valley that's near Jerusalem, right? Called Gehenna, or Gehinnom, the valley of Gehinnom. So that means it's the underworld, a lowly world. So there we have this sense. Now remember, they're thinking not that they live on a round planet, but that they live on some kind of a flat world, and there's a dome above it, right? And then Eden and Gan Eden, they're accessible, right? There was the entrance of Gan Eden, which is understood to be somewhere near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, but it's an entrance, it's a portal to another spiritual realm. Likewise, Gehenna, you reach it through some kind of a portal when you die and need to go there and have your soul refined. But where is it located? So if the world is a pot cover, it's like Gehenna, that vast, vast, vast space somewhere beneath the world, right? Beneath the world. Not in there in the core of the earth. Again, they're not thinking about a round planet, but beneath the world. And that's why the world is like a pot cover on Gehenna. Yes. And so, in any event, in terms of these massive distances between the firmaments, between the domes and the sky, this is a conclusive refutation of Rava's opinion that the thickness of the firmament is only 1,000 parasangs. I'm almost done. The Gemara presents a similar dispute. The Jewish sages, now here it says, the Jewish sages say that during the day the sun travels beneath the firmament and is therefore visible, right? So that's the traveling of the sun during the day, and it's beneath the firmament. And the sages of the nations of the world, right? The sages, the non-Jewish sages, say that during the day the sun travels beneath the firmament. I'm sorry. The Jewish sages say that during the day the sun travels beneath the firmament and is therefore visible, and at night it travels above the firmament. So that's how it gets back to where it started from, right? So the original conception of the Jewish sages was at dawn the sun begins to come through the firmament, the dome of the atmosphere, as it were, and then it becomes visible, and then it travels across beneath, but above us, but beneath the firmament. And then at twilight in the evening, it passes through the firmament to where it becomes invisible. And then it goes back over the firmament where we can't see it. But the sages of the nations of the world, the non-Jewish sages, say that during the day, the sun travels beneath the firmament. And at night, it travels beneath the earth. So it's more of a circle. It comes through the firmament, goes above us, goes out through the firmament again, but now goes under the earth to come back to where it started. Again, this is the technology that they had. But what's so interesting is they're willing to, they never, right? The Jewish sages always assume because we have the Torah, we know more than everybody else about what God wants from us. But when it comes to physics as they understood it, they're perfectly willing to defer. And the sages of the nations of the world say that during the day the sun travels beneath the firmament and at night travels beneath the earth and around to the other side of the world. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, Rebbe, the redactor of the Mishna, the sage who published the Mishna, and the statement of the sages of the nations of the world appears to be more accurate than our statement. A proof to this is that during the day, springs that originate deep in the ground are cold, and during the night, they are hot compared to the air temperature, which supports the theory that these springs are warmed by the sun as it travels beneath the earth. It was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Nassan says, during the summer, the sun travels high in the sky, above the earth. Therefore, the entire world is hot, and the springs that originate deep in the ground are cold. On the other hand, during the winter, the sun travels low in the sky, over the edges of the earth. Therefore, the entire world is cold, but the springs are hot relative to the air temperature. So the sages will make these observations about the physical world just in order to sort of say, okay, well, like, where do we have to know facts about the physical world? Not that often where it's going to have an impact on halacha. So here they're really having more of a, speculation type of discussion. When one of these kinds of measurements is really important, it's much more concise and measurable, like the distance between Jerusalem and Modi'in. There, okay, 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers. If you're further away than that, you're excused from bringing the Korban Pesach. If you're closer than that, you must bring it. And if you don't, you're liable to receive kares. When we get into these great, great, great distances, okay, so we can argue about it. Even the sages argued among themselves, And even Rebbe was willing to say, you know what? The sages outside of Israel, they have a better theory. It works better. It's better at predicting what's going to happen. Very interesting discussion to me for those reasons. All right, let's get to your comments and questions. Michael, the sages seem to have many opinions on the celestial world and how the earth and planets revolve. Yet we are supposed to take their words as being the truth and nothing but the truth. But that's definitely not what I just said. But when it comes to scientific and medical stuff, they seem to be stuck in time. So how do we know when the line breaks and when we get the truth and nothing but the truth, not medieval speculation? That's why we had to study the words very carefully, very, very carefully indeed. And so there are some times when we have to say, okay, we've got science that is going to say certain things for sure. However, remember that, the physics and the physicists of the nations of the world also were pretty convinced about a flat earth. I mean, he was saying, okay, the scientists of the world, the sages of the nations of the world have a better idea than us, because they were talking about, the spheres, the celestial spheres containing the various heavenly bodies. According to what we know today, that was equally wrong, right? So it's not that, and that was the absolute considered opinion. Science itself is not ever final. That's the whole idea of science. There are many things that we thought were absolutely true 100 years ago that we have since learned are not true. And so therefore, we should ourselves as moderns, I would say, need to keep a certain dose of humility when we want to chuckle at the ancients. Because there were a lot of truths that they had where maybe their numbers were wrong. But in terms of the spiritual significance of the holdings and what they're asking us to live by, and whether that's going to become a sustainable system of values that we can transmit to our kids and expect that our grandkids are also going to have those values, then we should be very humble indeed. Because as we've seen, let's say modifications to eternal values, which have been, brought about by moderns in the last 100 years, I think it's a real question whether they have been a real improvement over what the ancients had. Maybe we know more about medicine, about cosmology, about all kinds of physical chemistry and biological sciences. But how much have we really advanced in creating peace, in creating values, in raising honest people that want to live an honest life and that care for their elders? We have to be a dose of humility, never a bad idea. Betzalel ben Avraham. If the Creator uses pain and suffering to push us in this world, the upper world has to be the same by the concept that this world is a reflection of the upper world. The only difference is that the pain and suffering will be spiritual and by no means to be misunderstood as less intense than in this world. Burning, choking, beheading, stoning all occur in the upper world, just in a spiritual sense that we cannot understand. I mean, it's become quite out of fashion to talk about the idea that we'll be called upon to pay a price for our actions here. But know that it is so. We will be called to account. Now, what's nice about, I would say, the Jewish cosmology, which is not simply, binary, heaven or hell, and that's it, but rather, hell is a place where you go to atone and account for everything that you've done wrong. Then you can enter paradise, but paradise itself has like an infinite number of strata, right? And it's kind of like you can enter and you can even rise within that to sort of come closer to the divine, the seat of the divine. So because there's so many levels and places where you can end up, that allows for a much more, sort of precise justice that can be dispensed for us as we account for our deeds in this place. We know that in this world, justice is not apparent. We can't say that the wicked are all punished and the good are all rewarded in this world. We can't say that. We know it's not so. We have faith that one day, perhaps when we die, perhaps when Mashiach comes, perhaps when it'll be granted to us to know in the next life or some other life, that God's justice will be revealed to us, and we'll understand why everything that seems so unjust was in fact necessary for some greater picture that God sees that we don't. But in terms of what you're saying, that there's pain above, which somehow it mirrors the pain that is here, and perhaps is is doled out in a way that up there we get the justice of it. Maybe you're right. Maybe so. Certainly, we have strong faith that God is all powerful. He sees everything, has full power, and is good. Right? Omniscient, omnipresent, and good. Everything, and since we've been told that all our deeds are recorded and that we'll be called to account for them, both good and bad, that's what the next world is all about. And we should hold ourselves up to a standard. We should live that way, as if we'll be called to account for every deed, particularly the hidden deeds, the ones that only God can see and that other humans don't, both for good and for bad. Lucy, C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce, a metaphorical book about heaven and hell, also has a concept of hell as spatially huge, but he sees it as the result of the breakdown of community. The people there do not like each other and want to move away from each other further and further. I wasn't aware of that one. Beautiful, beautiful. There's a midrash, right? We talked about it before. What is hell? Hell is a banquet where everyone sits at a long, enormous table, and the table is covered with the best food you could have ever imagined. It's beautiful. It's like the tastiest, best, most luxurious, awesomest food imaginable. But everybody has arms that are locked straight. And so you can't get the food to your mouth. It's the best food in the world, but you can't get it to your mouth because you can't bend your elbows. That's hell. What is heaven? Same table, same foods, same locked arms. What's the difference? The people in heaven feed each other. Because with a straight arm, I can get the food to my neighbor's mouth and he can get it to mine. Beautiful teaching. And finally, Sharon says, how are classes being handled Thursday and Friday due to the Megillah on Thursday in particular? Thursday, we're going to go an hour early. It's going to be 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Thursday, that's Thursday. Because we're fasting, right? For people who don't know, Purim begins Thursday night, the holiday of Purim, where we read the Megillah, the book of Esther. We have to read, and so there's a Jewish obligation to read it twice or to hear it read in Hebrew, the whole Megillah. That's where you get that phrase. The Megillah, in this case, refers to the book of Esther. So we need to go and we fast all day. That's the fast of Esther. Just like in the Esther story, she asked all the Jews to fast because there was a death sentence on all the Jews in the world. So the point is, this class is going to be 1 hour early on Thursday. We'll make a post about this. Then on Friday, at the regular time, there'll be no class, but instead I will go live to do our annual reading of the book of Esther in English. So that's going to be at the normal time on Friday, noon Pacific. I'll be reading the book of Esther in English. So we'll miss a daf that day, and we're going to make it up the next night. Motzi Shabbos, Saturday night, is going to be a double daf, right? So we'll cover 2 pages of the Talmud on Saturday night. And I'll make a post about that with God's help tomorrow. Thank you for your question. Thank you for learning with us tonight. This was quite a journey that we all took together, and I wish you well. Have a great night.